Father Cristino, welcome back.
Thank you, Ken.
Really appreciate the time that you give to us. So thank you very, very much. Today we're going to talk about almsgiving. I think sometimes you throw out the word almsgiving. What is it? If you ask the average Catholic, I wonder if they would know how to respond. So let's respond to that. What is almsgiving? And also, what is it not?
Well, I would say, building off of a previous conversation that we had about self-denial, almsgiving is another kind of self-denial, because it is the freely, generously giving away of my resources. Not all of them, obviously. I don't think our Lord would ask anyone to give away everything that they have, just for the sake of charity. Obviously, he asks us to give up everything to follow him, which means that we don't let anything hold us back from our discipleship. But almsgiving has a very specific and intentional focus, which is to take from what I know I have and contribute it towards, traditionally and specifically was understood to be the needs of the poor. And that, I think, can be broadened to understand more than even just the materially poor. Because I think in a way you could say almsgiving is as important, if not more important, for the almsgiver than the receiver.
How come?
Well, the receiver is going to need it. It's going to need more. It never stops being needed. No one ever stops needing money, for example, because you get money in order to spend it. It's not something that you eventually, well, you could say that you have now enough money that you don't need anymore, but all that really means is you can't spend as much as you have. But when you're reliant upon alms, you are absolutely going to spend all of what you get because you're just getting by, right? So the alms receiver is going to continuously be in a position of needing to have more. The alms giver, in giving it away, is always being reminded of that opportunity to deny oneself, and also to see the beauty of being able to contribute to building up someone else. So that's why I say I think the one who gives ends up receiving more than the one who receives the alms in the first place.
So traditionally it's been understood giving to the poor, not necessarily the church.
Well, I think you could then, that's why it's good to qualify what we mean by the poor, in that anyone who has a need could be understood to be poor. Right?
Okay.
So the materially poor have the most blatantly obvious need. But then when we look at the church, how else does she function except off of the contributions of the faithful?
Right.
In some cases and in some places in the world, because of being well established and institutions having the capacity to make investments and own property and real estate, like the church in Canada, wherever, anywhere in Canada, the church has money, it's almost always because historically the church was the first institution to be there as the country was being established. It amassed vast amounts of property, and then eventually that property turned into something that was valuable. That's largely why anywhere that has any substantial amount of money in Canada has the money that it has. But for ongoing operation, the church can only function because of the generosity of the faithful. And that's why it is actually one of the precepts of the church that the faithful contribute towards the material needs of the church, which normally translates into your local parish. But then, of course, it's helpful for us to see more broadly beyond just the parish and to see the local church, the diocese, maybe to say our parish is actually very comfortable. We make all that we really need. We're doing well. So are there other parishes in the diocese that we know need help? Or are there other programs of social assistance where we see that if I were to contribute towards this, I'm actually helping to multiply the reach of my financial contribution because it's able to be put in multiple different directions.
Little side step here, and I've always been thinking about this for a while, and I want to know your opinion. Within Canada and also other many countries, there's many social service programs for those who are in need. And I'm wondering is if all these government programs, if you lack of a better word, handouts to some really legitimate needs that we have in Canada, have somehow hurt the charitable giving of Canadians. Because let's say we see a need, or a person, I won't give it to them because there's a program that looks after that, so I won't give here. Or you see a person along the side of the street, and I know it happens in our city, but you know what? There's a place for them to stay where they can get food downtown, so I won't give to them on the side. So the question back: has government got in the way of giving, charity, and almsgiving?
I'm sure to some extent you could argue that. I think that, as I was alluding to just a moment ago, about some agencies are able to kind of multiply the way in which your gift or your giving can go, because it's organized in such a way that it's helping to bring up many people at once versus whoever the one random person is you happened upon. I think another one of the things that specifically addresses the question of helping a person who is in need that you meet face to face is just simply the fact that people don't carry cash money anymore.
Oh, yeah.
There was a time that someone, as they were known, a panhandler, got what they needed because at the end of the day, if enough people walked by you and dropped some change into your hat, you were able to go and purchase whatever food you might need that day. But I think it's probably very realistic that nowadays a person could sit on the corner and panhandle, and quite sincerely, everyone who walks by them is not lying to say, sorry, I don't have anything.
Right.
I'm sometimes wondering if we're going to start seeing panhandlers are going to be able to let you tap your credit card if you want to help them somehow. You
just inspired an entrepreneur.
Yes, there you go.
And they will get their 10% for the
and that's where what you're asking about with regard to government kind of being in the way. I don't know if it's fair to say that government is in the way, but it can give the impression. Sometimes I think we can get the idea that it's someone else's responsibility. Caring for the poor, providing for the needy, doing charitable works, that there's someone else who's responsible for that. And I'm just little old me, and what can I do all by myself?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the bigger problem, is that because of having a very large social service structure, we can easily think to ourselves that that's someone else's job. And then we abdicate the responsibility that we do have as individuals to look for the needs of others and see how we can help alleviate those needs.
Because there was a time in our country of Canada where there was no social structure at all, like nets, like there was no programs. And not too long ago in the history of our people living here, like I go back to the 1930s, and I wanted to bring this up, but my great-grandmother, Grandma Larry, she was widowed in 1931. My great-grandfather died and left her with 12 children on the farm. The oldest was 16 or 17. The oldest boy was 16. And there was, I think, 3 or 4 under the age of 5. So here's a woman who has just lost her husband. She's on the farm. They're poor. They don't have much at all. And growing up, I was aware of some of the stories. Like my grandma, later she lived in a boxcar next to our house. Actually, where I grew up, there was a park, but she lived in a boxcar with 2 other of her siblings in town. At one point, there's no insulation. Like it's cold in a train car. That's where they lived. But on the farm, her stories. The train tracks would go by the farm, and at that point in the 1930s. A lot of men would ride the rail, and they would see the farm. They would jump off the train, and it was often that my Grandma Larry would find men in the barn, and she always fed them. So they didn't have anything. Like there was no social structure. What they ate is what they grew from, but she didn't turn people away. And I remember stories hearing about Grandma Larry with all these children to provide for, but feeding the men that jumped off the rail. There was another man, his name's Joe Horse. He was a native guy, and he would walk miles in the area on crutches because he had a withered leg. And he always came to my Grandma Larry's farm for a meal. He would walk miles for a meal. And my Grandma Larry always gave him a meal. They actually couldn't speak to each other because she only knew French and he only knew English. But he always got a meal from Grandma Larry. My mom recently told me about another man who showed up in the area, a World War I veteran, and was in need, and they built him a shack on the land that they owned, and they looked after him. He didn't pay. My mom in the 1950s remembers running meals out to his shack to him to feed him. So I look at my Grandma Larry, like incredibly generous, and even to give you an idea of the need that she was in when her husband passed away. So my great grandpa dies. She didn't have money for the casket. So she went to the bank for a loan, and they denied her the loan because she was a woman. So she had to go back to the farm and sold a pig in order to have enough money to give her husband a proper Catholic burial. So I think, and I knew Grandma Larry. I was blessed. She lived a long life, and then she ended up living in our hometown where I grew up with one of my great aunts. So I remember little, seeing her in a wheelchair, talking to her, and when I hear of these stories now as an adult, I'm like an incredibly generous woman who just gave, and I'm really grateful. And sometimes I wonder, again, I go back to our government, I just don't think or just the state of our society, people don't live like that now.
No.
Like they're going from meal to meal, and then she's also giving meals away. Anyways, I share that as a story of inspire listeners and to encourage them in their generosity towards other people who are really in need.
Yeah. No, I think that's vitally important, because what your great grandmother understood, whether she would have been able to even articulate it or not, was that what she had wasn't hers. It was everyone who needed it. And that meant her children, first and foremost. But then if someone else showed up unexpectedly and they needed, she put what she had at the service of those. Now, it's limited, right? If 25 men jumped off the train and came to the barn, well, obviously her generosity would have a limit.
Yes.
But not actually. Her generosity had no limits. Her resources had a limit. And that's the difference, is almsgiving is supposed to train us to have generosity without limits, even though we are limited by what we have available to us. Things are finite by definition. And so you will only have so much money to give away, and you will only have so many potatoes that you can cook up and serve to the people that come off of the train tracks into your barn. There's not an unlimited supply. And so when we learn and train ourselves in that special kind of self-denial, which says, I am not going to hoard and keep to myself all of what I do have. I want to try and put at the service of others, not just what I have left over, but what I have. And that's a very important distinction that almsgiving calls forth from us. Am I only giving what I think is extra? Or am I saying, this is all of what I have, and I make all of it available, however it can be used? That's the spirit that your great-grandmother lived from out of. And when one lives in that way, they must be relying upon divine providence. And when you're relying upon divine providence, countless stories in the scriptures remind us that it is God who is going to provide for those needs. And as the widow of Zarephath learned when Elijah came and asked for a loaf of bread from the last flour that she had, the jar of flour and the jug of oil did not run empty, even though in theory she should have lost the little that she had left. But because she put it at the service of Elijah, God's prophet, he sustained it. And so in our almsgiving, especially in the season of Lent, when it is explicitly called forth from us, we really do need to ask ourselves, am I just trying to hive off what I think is extra that I probably don't need anyhow and say, this is all that I have available to give? Or do we look at the whole and say, what can I do to try and make all of what I have available?
In the 1930s, when Grandma Larry was being very generous that way, the world was different. They didn't have a tap, right? You didn't just go tap and everything is paid for. You didn't have credit. I'm not sure of what mortgages were at that point. I'm unfamiliar. But you look at today's world, and it's vastly different. We talk about consumer debts and mortgages of like amortization of beyond 30 years, and people continuously can't get ahead. And then we have the struggle of inflation. Like I can tell you, I'm not sure how it is in the United States where most of our listeners are, but in Canada, inflation is very noticeable in food. And we know this as a family in our food bill. Like things have just got more and more expensive very quickly. I'm like, yeah, this is getting harder. Like it's expensive. A jug of milk, like everything is going up and up and up. And so then you look at almsgiving and what the church is inviting us to do. Times are different now. People are swimming in debt. So can you speak to that? What if a person feels like they're swimming in debt? And debt can be stifling to a person. It's like this unspoken burden that we don't talk about. I don't know if I've ever heard a homily on financial debt, but like it consumes basically, it touches every family. Every family in some way typically has some type of debt. If it's not consumer debt, well, hopefully people get out of that, like to own a home. Housing, incredibly expensive. How does that now affect almsgiving?
That is a very important question and consideration that I think relates back to something that is so frequently overlooked and even just simply ignored in the church's social teaching, which has to do with the condemnation of usury. Usury being the loaning of money at a high interest rate. So the whole concept of compounding interest, the church has taught is evil. And so there's the difference between calculating what you are losing by putting this amount of money at someone else's disposal over this amount of time. And so you calculate an interest rate that accounts for the length of time that you are without this lump sum of money. Interest in and of itself is not wrong. Interest is it's just a cost. It's a cost factored into the business of needing to hand out money. But when you look at what happens with a credit card, I just experienced this. I have 2 credit cards, one that I use for all my day-to-day purchases and one that would be only if I'm traveling or something like that. And I discovered that there was some discrepancies with my one credit card, and I've gotten into this argument with the credit card company, and they are unrelenting. And so I just decided I'm going to stop using it altogether. I'm not going to cancel it. I don't want it to wreck my credit score, whatever it would be called, but I'm just not going to use it. It can sit there and collect dust as far as I'm concerned. Well, I thought that I had paid off the last bill, but I didn't realize that I had these pre-authorized payments that were still on it. And so I missed one whole month of having paid that off. So then when I realized that, I went and paid it off. But then this month, I've gotten another bill for the interest that was charged on the missed payment from the month before. And that's the first time in my life that I've ever let that happen, because I'm careful to not spend more than I can afford. So I pay off my credit card bill right away. I thought to myself, what must it be like to be put in a position where you can't afford to pay your bills, so you need to use this credit card to keep your lights on, and then next month, you're just paying for the fact that you couldn't afford to pay for that in the first place. That's how people can end up getting trapped in this cycle of debt, because it's compounding at this exorbitant rate. The fact that you already were in a financially disadvantaged situation. Now, it gets worse if people start living beyond their means and consumerism takes over, and so they just start racking up credit card debt on things that they shouldn't have because they can't afford them. I'm not commenting on that, but the fact that this credit card that I already thought did me wrong has just continued to take money from me, all in the name of this interest, that is evil. And trying to free ourselves up from participating in that is very important. But when that becomes the way in which you associate with money, that it's always just being taken from you at a rate that is unjust, you're not going to think about giving away more of your money. Mm-hmm. It completely cripples people from having the belief that they're even capable of almsgiving, that they even have anything to give, because what they think they do have is already being taken away from them. And so it completely inverts our instinct to put what we do have at the service of others. So I think more than government getting in the way, the big banking industry and money lending industry at these exorbitant interest rates, that is totally destroying any concept that we have of trying to be generous.
Yeah, sorry that happened to you.
A good lesson for me to learn.
I know that you have a project and that you've been working on for some time, that you took over, and now that it is yours, that is an important one. Can you share that?
Well, sure. I actually, this is all very much on the front of my mind because we just built a new church in the town where I serve in Strathmore, Alberta. And the community there had been without a church for 17 years. The parish is over 100 years old, but the church that had previously been there, it's a kind of a long history, but tragically, the building was no longer able to be used. And so for 17 years, the people of that parish community were gathering for Mass in a school gym on Sunday mornings, taking down chairs, putting chairs away, setting them back up after week. It's so inspiring to know what the people there went through. And all that time, they were trying to save money to be able for us to afford to build ourselves a new church. And I was very blessed to be sent there at the beginning of really getting that construction and renovation work underway. And so we've opened the doors to our new church, but now we're saddled with debt. And it's been very interesting for me to try and navigate this dynamic with people where you remind them of the importance of generosity and of almsgiving and of trying to contribute towards that, while also knowing very well that many of my parishioners are just trying to keep the lights on in their home and keep their families fed, and that there isn't a lot extra to go around. But that's partly why we rely upon generosity from whatever direction it will come from, because we needed a home. You can't expect to last forever as a community that has no home. Now we have that home, and because of my concern around these exorbitant interest rates, we want to see if we can get that debt paid down as fast as we can. And so finding that balance between challenging people to remember to be generous while realizing that there's only so much that people can do. Resources are limited, right? So there doesn't necessarily have to be a limit to our generosity, but when there's a limit on our resources, we have to look around and see how we can rely upon the help of our neighbors as well.
And I have been there a few times already now when I go and interview you out in your area. And I have to say, it's a beautiful church. It's not one of these modern churches that you wonder and look at like, what is that thing, right? It's identifiably Catholic and a traditional architecture. It's beautiful. And you would agree, wouldn't you? Like, it's
absolutely.
Yeah. Like it's, I don't know who made those decisions, what went in, but they made some really good decisions, because I've seen in my travels some complete disasters of new churches. This is not one of them. This is a beautiful church. People are very blessed. They're blessed to have you. And we are blessed to have you on this channel. So I'm going to go to you who've been following us for a long time. If you've been blessed by Father Cristino's presence on this channel, I would ask you to consider helping Father Cristino and his parish with a financial gift. I'll put a link in the description of this video. But I've never done this before, but I think it's important. If you've been tuning in for a while and you've been blessed by his wisdom, and Father, you've taken time of your busy schedule, and I know what many people ask you to speak, many different groups ask you to come on this podcast or this media organization. And I know that you say no to almost everything, but you've made yourself available to me, and I'm really grateful for that. And if you've been grateful for that, please be generous with Father Cristino and his parish, because they're in need. So please consider that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome. And with that, share with us below what stood out to you and why. And we'll end with a prayer.
O my Jesus, O highest good, I repent of having so lightly esteemed your grace that I have bartered it away for a mere nothing. When will it be, O Lord, that I shall see you face to face and shall embrace you without the fear of ever having to lose you? Aid me with your grace. This I hope for through your merits. More and more increase in me your love and the desire to please you. Amen.